The wind that night was merciless. It swept across the empty plains of Texas, rattling the old tin signs at the train station and cutting through every gap in the wooden platform. It was the kind of cold that gnawed at bones, the kind of silence that made even the smallest sound echo with startling clarity. And standing there, clutching a thin shawl around her trembling shoulders, was a young nurse named Clara Hayes. She had traveled hundreds of miles for work that no longer existed, and now she found herself stranded in a town she had never heard of, with nothing but a worn suitcase and a heart that refused to give up. On the other end of that platform, boots crunched against the frost. Jacob Montgomery, known across the county as the Millionaire Cowboy, strode with quiet purpose. Born to hardship but risen through grit, land, and cattle, Jacob had built an empire of ranches and oil rights. Yet, despite his wealth, he lived simply, favoring the saddle over limousines and wide skies over marble halls. The people knew him as a man who kept to himself, kind, but distant. That night, he hadn't come to the train station for company. He had come to send off a few ranch hands heading home for the holidays. But when he saw Clara, shivering alone, her face pale from the cold, something in him stirred. She looked like a ghost of resilience, fragile in form, yet holding herself with quiet dignity. He paused, tipping his hat. "Miss," Jacob said softly, his voice carrying the warm drawl of the land, "you look about frozen. You waitin' on someone?" Clara swallowed hard. "No, sir. Just waiting for, I suppose, hope to come around on the next train." Her attempt at a smile was brave, though her lips trembled. Jacob studied her, the way her hands clutched her shawl, the way her eyes revealed exhaustion but not defeat. He could have walked on. He had done his share of kindnesses in life, and many times, he had also hardened himself against the endless needs of strangers. But something about Clara's presence felt different, like an echo of his own loneliness. "Come inside," he said finally, motioning toward the small waiting room. "At least warm up by the stove. Ain't no sense in lettin' the cold take you." Inside, the faint glow of the potbelly stove threw long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Clara sat, clutching her suitcase. Jacob poured coffee from a tin pot and handed her a cup. She accepted it with gratitude, her eyes meeting his. And in that moment, a story began, one that would outlive them both. Clara explained how she had been working as a nurse in Dallas, caring for wounded veterans returning from overseas. But the hospital she served at had shut down suddenly due to lack of funds, leaving her without work. Desperate, she boarded a train in search of a small-town clinic rumored to be hiring. When she arrived, the position had already been filled. With nowhere to go, no money left, and the next train not scheduled until morning, she had been prepared to spend the night on the platform. Jacob listened quietly. Something in her story touched the buried parts of him, the part that remembered his mother patching up neighbors during the Dust Bowl, the part that had seen men broken by war and lifted again by kindness. "You're a nurse," Jacob said, his gaze steady. "This town's got more need for one than it knows. Folks out here, when they get sick or hurt, it's a long ride to the city." Clara sighed. "I'd help if I could. But I have no place here. No one's expecting me." Jacob leaned back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe they weren't expecting you. But maybe you're exactly who they need." The days that followed changed everything. Jacob, moved by compassion he couldn't quite explain, offered Clara shelter at his ranch until she found her footing. She resisted at first, her pride didn't want to accept charity, but Jacob's tone was never pitying. It was practical, kind, steady, like the man himself. At the ranch, Clara found warmth, food, and something else she hadn't known in a long time, belonging. She mended cuts for ranch hands, cared for children in the small town nearby, and even tended to Jacob when he rode back one night with a broken arm from taming a wild stallion. She stitched him up, scolding him gently, and he laughed in spite of the pain. In those moments, their bond deepened, not through grand gestures, but through simple acts of care. Clara's heart, once heavy with uncertainty, began to heal. Jacob's heart, long walled off by wealth and solitude, began to open. But life, as it often does, tested them. A brutal winter storm swept through the plains, isolating the ranch. Supplies ran low, cattle grew restless, and many ranch hands fell ill. Clara worked tirelessly, nursing them back to health, sometimes going without sleep for days. Jacob watched her with awe. Her hands were steady, her compassion unshakable, her spirit unwavering even when her body trembled with exhaustion. One night, after she had collapsed by the fire in sheer fatigue, Jacob covered her with a blanket and whispered, though she could not hear, "I've lived with money, with land, with all the things men chase. But none of it ever filled the emptiness. You've brought life back into these walls." Spring brought relief, and with it, clarity. The townsfolk had begun to speak of Clara as their angel, their healer. Jacob, once a solitary figure in their stories, was now seen alongside her. And though neither had spoken of love, everyone who saw them together knew it was written plainly between them. One evening, standing beneath the wide Texas sky painted with 1,000 stars, Jacob finally found the words. "Clara," he said, voice steady, "the night I met you, you were freezin' on a platform, waitin' on hope. I reckon neither of us knew what we were waitin' for. But I think, it was this. Us. I don't want you to ever wait alone again. Will you stay? Will you marry me?" Tears glistened in Clara's eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming beauty of it all. She nodded, whispering, "Yes. Yes, I will." Their marriage was more than a union of two souls. It became a story carried on the wind, told in church pews and train cars, across dusty roads and into bustling cities. The millionaire cowboy who could have had anyone chose the nurse who had nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of kindness. And together, they built something greater than riches, a legacy of love, service, and generosity. In the years that followed, Jacob and Clara turned part of his ranch into a free clinic for the poor. Children grew up stronger, families lived longer, and no one was ever turned away. They traveled, shared their story, and inspired others to act with compassion. When people asked Clara what had saved her that night at the train station, she always smiled and said, "It wasn't the man's wealth that saved me, it was his kindness. And when kindness meets kindness, history is made." And so it was. A cold night, a lonely nurse, a quiet cowboy, what could have been just a fleeting encounter became a love story that made history. A story that proved once again that the richest treasures in life are not found in banks or ranches, but in hearts willing to give, to serve, and to love without measure.